The cold wind whistles through modern streets, and you picture people rushing to supermarkets, carts rattling, shelves stripped bare at the first hint of a storm. We panic. We stockpile canned soup, boxes of cereal, maybe bottles of water we'll never drink. But imagine instead a world where refrigeration doesn't exist, where expiration dates aren't printed, where survival through winter depends entirely on how well you've prepared months earlier. This was everyday life for Native American tribes across the continent. They didn't just store food for weeks, they created stockpiles that could last years, even decades, without spoiling. And they did it with such genius that modern survival experts still marvel at their methods. Tonight, imagine you're inside a dimly lit lodge, smoke swirling toward a vent overhead, hides stretched tight against poles that creak softly in the wind. Outside, the prairie is frozen white, endless and merciless, but inside there is quiet calm. Piles of clay pots, bark-wrapped bundles, woven baskets and animal skin pouches surround you, stacked carefully, each holding foods that seem ordinary: corn, beans, berries, roots. But in truth, they are miracles. Foods designed not to spoil, foods meant to carry families through winters when hunting was scarce, foods so durable they could sit untouched for generations and still be edible. You'd probably never make it through a single medieval night of hunger, let alone months without supermarkets. But don't worry, I'll guide you safely through. So before we go any further, if this quiet company helps, you can gently tap like and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Maybe drifting in bed in Toronto, or in a quiet room somewhere in Sydney. Drop your time and place below so none of us feel alone tonight. Now dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey, together, here on Timeless Sleep. The first marvel we encounter in this circle of preserved foods is pemmican, often called the ultimate survival food. Picture thin strips of buffalo meat hung on racks in the dry wind, turning from raw flesh to brittle wafers. Once they've lost every drop of moisture, they're pounded into a coarse powder, meat transformed into dust, as if the prairie itself had swallowed it. Then comes the magic ingredient, fat rendered from the same animal, melted until it glistens. This fat is poured over the meat powder, stirred until every fragment is coated, then left to cool into dense blocks. Sometimes berries, tart chokecherries or cranberries, are added, giving flashes of flavour and extra nutrients. What you're left with is a block so calorie-dense, so perfectly sealed, that it could last for decades. Bacteria, the eternal spoilers, need moisture to thrive. Remove it, coat the remains in fat, and you've made a vault. A single pound of pemmican contained more usable energy than a modern three-course dinner. Warriors carried it on long hunts, travellers packed it on horseback, families stored it through winters when no fresh food could be found. It wasn't flashy. It looked like greyish-brown bricks, hardly appetising by Instagram standards, but it worked. And really, survival rarely cares about plating. To imagine eating pemmican, think of the chew of jerky, the richness of marrow, the tart snap of berries, all compressed into something that doesn't just fill you but fuels you. A handful could power you for days. Modern hikers still recreate it, though usually with grocery store beef and freezer bags. But for tribes who lived this daily, pemmican wasn't just a recipe. It was insurance, it was survival, it was life itself. And the sheer humour of it? While we complain about our protein bars tasting like cardboard, pemmican bars from centuries ago are still edible today if stored right. Imagine biting into food older than your grandfather and finding it fine, chewy, dense, greasy, but fine. That's both impressive and slightly disturbing, a reminder that modern snacks are the weaklings of food history. But pemmican was only one treasure. Behind it sat clay jars filled with dried corn kernels, rock-hard nuggets that could outlast kingdoms. These weren't just leftovers from harvest. Corn, properly dried, was survival insurance. Each kernel, less than 14% moisture, became a time capsule, poured into clay pots sealed with bark, lined with pine pitch, or buried in pits beneath the earth. These kernels could sit for decades, untouched, and emerge ready to grind into meal, boil into soup, or even pop over a fire for a rare crunchy treat. Imagine running your fingers through a jar of these kernels, hearing the rattle like tiny stones, Each sound is reassurance. Your family will eat through the storm. Each pot is security, a hedge against the unknown. And here's the cheeky aside. You could probably knock someone unconscious with a sack of them. Food and weapon, dual-purpose efficiency. Then came beans, the partner to corn. Dried until they rattled in their pods stored in jars, they were complete protein when combined with corn. It was biochemistry in action, discovered without microscopes or lab coats. Corn lacked certain amino acids, beans lacked others. Together, they became as nourishing as meat. Picture a pot bubbling in midwinter, beans swelling back to life, cornmeal thickening the broth. It tasted hearty, earthy, filling, and it meant life went on. While modern gym-goers fret about protein powders expiring after 2 years, beans from these stores could be simmered after 20 and still deliver strength. But the genius didn't stop with staples. Look deeper into the storage bundles and you'd find berries, cranberries with their waxy coats, choke cherries crushed into cakes, blueberries dried into chewy nuggets. These weren't just sweet, they were medicine. Packed with vitamin C, they kept scurvy at bay while European sailors died on the sea. Imagine holding a choke cherry cake. Dark, hard as stone, smelling faintly of tart fruit and smoke. Bite a piece, and it softens slowly. A burst of flavour that wakes your senses, proof that fruit can laugh at time when treated right. Nuts too were there. Walnuts, hickory, acorns. Their shells were nature's Tupperware, sealing in fats and proteins, keeping out insects and moisture. Stored underground or in baskets, they lasted years, sometimes decades. Crack one open, long after harvest, and you'd find the kernel still rich, still edible, as if the tree had just dropped it. While we throw out nuts after a few months in the pantry, these were treasures meant to outlast grandchildren. And then, tucked carefully, sugar bricks. Maple sap boiled and crystallized until it hardened into blocks. Sweetness was not a luxury here, it was energy. Each block was an eternal candy bar, immune to mold, bacteria, and time. Picture licking a chunk in midwinter, sweetness spreading across your tongue, a moment of joy in the harshest season. It was dessert and medicine, quick calories for tired bodies trudging through snow. While colonists paid fortunes for imported sugar, native families had it stacked in neat bark-wrapped bundles, secure as gold. Roots joined the pile too. Prairie turnips, dug in summer, sliced thin, dried to translucence. Hard, unyielding when raw, but softened in boiling water into nutritious stew. Potatoes, in high-altitude tribes, were freeze-dried by nature itself. Frozen at night, thawed in the day, trampled to release water, dried into shriveled lumps that lasted longer than empires. These looked like nothing, blackened, wrinkled. But they were life. Grains from water filled the stores as well. Wild rice harvested from canoes, parched and dried, stored in birch bark containers, more protein than regular rice, and infinitely more durable. Pour a handful into boiling water years later, and it swelled back to life, chewy and fragrant. Even fish and shellfish joined the collection. Smoked salmon hung from racks, hard as leather, tasting rich and smoky years later. Clams and mussels dried until brittle, carried inland for trade. Ocean harvest turned into portable, long-lasting protein, and in baskets, squash strips, braided ropes of dried vegetable, flexible, leathery, waiting to be rehydrated into soups. Sunflower seeds, roasted and oiled, stored in jars, their nutrition sealed for decades. Pine nuts, rare and precious, harvested carefully, still edible years after storage. Everywhere you look inside this tipi, food stares back at you, not fresh, not perishable, but eternal. It is survival alchemy, water drawn out, fats locked in, shells and bark and ash turned into armor against decay. And maybe the most humbling thought, these foods, stacked neatly centuries ago, often outlasted the people who made them. A child grew, married, had children of their own, and the pemmican their parents stored was still edible, the corn still hard, the sugar brick still sweet. Their survival techniques created food that mocked time itself. So while we fret about whether milk has gone sour or whether chips are stale, remember the ingenuity of those who lived without fridges, freezers, or expiration dates. They trusted skill, not supermarkets. They stockpiled foods that never expired, not because of chemicals or factories, but because of knowledge, patience, and an intimacy with nature we've long forgotten. You turn back to the firelight and see, resting in bark-lined baskets, the food that might just be the most famous of all native survival staples, pemmican. You've heard whispers of it already, but now it demands centre stage, not just because it tasted like survival itself, but because it embodied everything brilliant about native ingenuity, efficiency, science without microscopes, and flavour that managed to be both dense and strangely comforting. Tonight, you get to linger with this legendary food, the super fuel that never expired. Picture the scene. Hunters returning from the plains, horses burdened with the heavy bodies of buffalo, elk, or deer. Every part of those animals mattered. Hide for shelter, sinew for bowstrings, bones for tools, fat for cooking and fuel. But the meat, that was the heartbeat of survival. Fresh meat was feasted on immediately, yes, but the vast majority was destined for something more important: storage, preservation. The long winter nights demanded food that didn't rot, that didn't shrink away after a week, that could outlast storms and migrations. That was pemmican's role. The process was meticulous. Meat was sliced into long, thin strips, thinner than your little finger, so the air could thread through every fibre. These strips were draped over wooden racks in the dry, whipping prairie winds. The sun joined the work, turning flesh from soft and red into stiff brown wafers. If weather threatened, fires were lit beneath the racks, not hot enough to cook, but steady enough to drive away moisture and pests. Slowly, day by day, the meat surrendered its water content until it was brittle as parchment. And here's where the genius really started. Dried meat alone will last some time, yes, but without fat it crumbles, loses its power. So the dried meat was pounded with stone tools until it became powder or fine shreds, reducing whole muscles into a texture almost like coarse flour. Into this dry base, hunters poured rendered fat, gleaming golden liquid scooped from boiled bones and roasted suet. The fat seeped into every crevice, binding the powder into a dense, heavy block. Sometimes crushed berries were added, chokecherries or cranberries, for a flash of tartness, and more importantly, for their natural preservative acids. The mixture was stirred, pressed, cooled, and finally packed into rawhide bags sealed tight. What emerged looked unremarkable: greyish-brown bricks, unglamorous lumps of dense food. But what they represented was nothing short of magic. A pound of pemmican could power a warrior for days. It was compact, portable, and almost absurdly calorie-dense. You didn't need a pantry, you needed a pouch. Imagine sliding one into your saddlebag and knowing it held the equivalent of entire meals, condensed into something smaller than a paperback book. Why did it never expire? The secret was twofold: water removed, fat sealed. Bacteria are like lazy house guests. They only thrive where moisture lingers. Strip that away, and they wither. Seal the dried meat in fat, and oxygen is shut out too. No air, no water, no rot. Pemmican laughed in the face of time. Years later, decades even, pemmican stored in dry places was still edible. It might harden, it might taste smoky or tangy, but it didn't spoil. Imagine unearthing a rawhide bag after 20 winters and finding the food inside as defiant as the day it was made. Modern hikers like to claim they're rugged, unwrapping protein bars and trail mixes, but compare their snacks, stamped with expiration dates barely a year long, to pemmican blocks that could outlive the campfire that birthed them. Survivalists today still make pemmican, though they grimace at the taste, calling it oily or heavy. Yet they admit it works. A handful sustains you longer than a bag of jerky or granola. Energy, pure and simple, concentrated by tradition. Of course, pemmican had its quirks. Too much fat, and the block turned rancid. Too little, and the powder crumbled into dust. Tribes perfected ratios by instinct, by feel, by taste. The balance was passed down like sacred knowledge, and humour slipped in too. Children sneaked pinches of berries from the mix. Warriors joked that pemmican was meat you could drink if you warmed it too much. Elders teased the young: eat pemmican today, and you'll still be chewing it tomorrow. Its texture was chewy, sticky, stubborn. It didn't melt in your mouth so much as battle your jaw until you surrendered. But once swallowed, it fueled you like fire. Imagine sitting now with a pouch of pemmican at your side. The block is dense, unyielding. You break off a piece, teeth sinking into something dry but rich, faintly smoky, with bursts of tart berry if you're lucky. It clings to your tongue, coats your lips with fat, and fills your stomach with a weight that promises endurance. Outside, the storm howls, but inside you're calm. You know that this single chunk could carry you days further, stronger, safer. Pemmican wasn't just survival food, it was wealth. Tribes traded it, gifting it as dowry, exchanging it for horses or tools. It was currency as much as sustenance. To possess pemmican was to possess security, a portable bank of calories that guaranteed you'd see another spring. Some even argued over the best recipes, whether berries were essential, or whether true pemmican should be meat and fat alone. Arguments you might hear in your own kitchen today, but with stakes far higher. And perhaps the most staggering fact. When Europeans entered the fur trade, they discovered pemmican and embraced it instantly. Voyagers paddling canoes across endless rivers carried nothing else for weeks. It fueled empires as much as it fueled hunters. An entire trade economy rose on the backs of these greasy, unassuming bricks. It wasn't just native survival, it became global endurance, the quiet backbone of exploration. The block of pemmican still rests in your imagination, dense and heavy, but now you lean closer and ask the question that has haunted every curious mind since. Why did it never spoil? The fire glows softer now, and your eyes drift from the pouch of pemmican toward the tall clay jars stacked carefully against the lodge wall. Their surfaces are marked with soot from past fires, lids sealed tight with pine pitch, woven mats tied snugly around their rims. What they hold is not meat nor fat, but a treasure every bit as important for survival: dried corn kernels. These little golden nuggets weren't just food, they were foundations. Entire civilizations rested on them, and in winter teepees they became both insurance and promise. Picture a harvest day months earlier. Fields of maize stand tall, leaves rustling in dry breezes, stalks browning with the season. Timing is everything here. Pick the corn too soon, and the kernels are soft, moisture-rich, vulnerable to rot. Wait too long, and frost or pests may take them. Elders walk the rows, fingers testing kernels, eyes judging the gloss on their surfaces, when the moment is right. Families move quickly, picking, husking, laying the ears out in the sun. Some are hung in bundles from rafters, others spread across woven mats on the ground. For days, sunlight and air conspire to strip them of water, hardening each kernel into something closer to stone than food. The transformation is astonishing. Fresh corn bursts with sweetness, kernels plump and juicy, but dried corn, it becomes rock hard, each one like a bead, clinking against the next when you scoop them. So hard, in fact, that a mischievous child might use them as ammunition in play, earning scoldings from watchful parents. Yet that hardness is precisely the point. Softness means moisture, and moisture means mold. Hardness means dryness, and dryness means endurance. By the time the kernels rattle crisply in their cobs, they've become something else entirely, a food that laughs at time. Once dry, the kernels are shelled, poured into storage vessels, clay jars with tight lids, baskets lined with pitch, seams sealed against damp air. Sometimes storage pits are dug, lined with bark covered with stones, hidden under layers of earth. The earth itself becomes a pantry, cool and dry, a silent guardian of treasure. Families might bury these caches in secret places, known only to them, so enemies or animals could not steal their winter's lifeline. Imagine walking across frozen plains knowing, beneath your very feet, baskets of corn lie hidden, waiting to be unearthed when hunger strikes. The genius of these kernels is their versatility. They are like blank canvases, waiting to become anything. Ground into meal, they transform into bread, thickened porridge or dumplings. Boiled whole, they soften into soups and stews, turning broth into filling meals. Tossed on hot coals, some pop into airy, crunchy snacks, a delight that must have sparked laughter around the fire long before cinemas claimed popcorn as their own. These kernels, though silent in their jars, hold infinite possibilities, and they last. Properly dried corn contains less than 14% moisture, well below the threshold where bacteria or mold can thrive. Months pass, years even, and still the kernels remain unchanged, patient, unyielding. Archaeologists have uncovered stores of corn hundreds of years old, still recognizable, still edible. While modern households debate whether cereal is still good after a few weeks past its printed expiration date, these jars of corn laugh at such timidity. Expiration dates. Please, this is food that waits decades without complaint. Of course, storage required vigilance. Mice and insects loved corn as much as people did, so sealing was crucial. That's where human ingenuity showed again. Pitch-sealed baskets that repelled pests, clay jars glazed smooth, pits lined with bark that discouraged burrowers. Every method was a defense, turning simple kernels into guarded wealth. Imagine a child hearing a faint scratching near the storage basket, at night leaping up to chase a mouse away because one small thief could threaten a winter's survival. In this way, every family member became a soldier in the quiet war against hunger. The humour wasn't absent, though. Someone dropping a jar and spilling kernels across the floor meant hours of crawling, picking them up one by one, cursing under breath while others laughed. Elders joked that properly dried kernels were so hard you could break a tooth if you tried to bite one raw. Food and weapon in the same package, they'd quip, holding up a handful. Children sometimes used kernels as toys, stringing them into necklaces or rattles, only to have them reclaimed later when supplies dwindled. Survival, after all, tolerated no waste. But corn wasn't only nutrition, it was spiritual. Many tribes saw it as a gift from divine forces, a plant with sacred origins. Stories told of corn emerging from the body of a woman, or gifted by spirits to teach humanity how to endure. Each kernel wasn't just food, it was connection. When families poured kernels into pots, they didn't just cook dinner, they invoked stories, traditions, gratitude. To eat corn was to remember ancestors, to honour cycles of growth, harvest and survival. And the nutritional genius, corn provided carbohydrates, dense energy to fuel muscles through long winters. But corn alone wasn't perfect. It lacked some amino acids. The true brilliance came when paired with beans, which carried the missing pieces. Together, corn and beans became a complete protein, rivaling meat. The people didn't know the biochemical jargon, but they knew the results. Families who ate both thrived. Hunger receded, strength endured. It was a partnership written not in textbooks, but in lived experience. Picture now a winter night in the tipi. Snow pounds outside, wind screams across the plains. Inside, the fire glows and a pot simmers gently. In it, kernels softened by hours of boiling swell and crack, releasing steam that smells faintly sweet. Bits of dried meat or beans are added, turning broth into hearty stew. Children peer into the pot eagerly, their hunger sharp, but their patience rewarded with warmth in their bellies. Each bite is nourishment, but also reassurance. The jars are full, the kernels plentiful, the family safe for another season. Corn's durability also fueled exploration. Travellers could carry sacks of kernels for weeks, grinding them into quick meal on the journey. Traders valued them, warriors relied on them, families built their calendars around them. In every form, fresh, dried, ground, popped, corn was not just a food, but a foundation. Without it, survival faltered. With it, civilizations flourished. Imagine serving centuries-old dried corn at a dinner party today. You'd watch your guests bite carefully, unsure, only to discover it still pops, still cooks, still nourishes. Their shock would be comical. While our packaged snacks wilt and rot, this ancient grain holds steady, unbothered, as if smirking at our weakness. So why did it never expire? Because it was stripped of water, sealed against air, hardened into resilience. Because families treated it with respect, storing it carefully, guarding it against invaders. Because nature itself conspired with human skill to create something more enduring than empire. You lean closer to one of those clay jars, your fingers brushing the cool, rough surface, and you realize that the kernels inside weren't the whole story. The real brilliance lay not only in drying the corn, but in how it was stored. Preservation wasn't just about preparation. It was about guardianship. Food could last decades, yes, but only if it was protected from moisture, pests, and decay. That's where the storage genius of native communities revealed itself. Clay jars sealed with pitch, woven baskets lined with resin, and underground pits designed to turn the earth itself into a refrigerator. Picture the clay pot first. Crafted from riverbed clay, smoothed, shaped, fired until hard, it wasn't just a vessel. It was a fortress. The walls kept out humidity, the tight-fitting lid sealed the top, and sometimes a layer of pine pitch or mud closed every crack. Into these jars went corn kernels, beans, even dried berries. Once filled, the pots were tucked into corners of lodges or hidden in storage houses. They sat quietly, cool and dry, their contents waiting. Children were warned not to tamper, not to rattle the jars because every sound was the sound of survival. Then came baskets. You might think of baskets as fragile, but these were marvels of engineering. Woven from reeds, grasses or bark strips, then coated with pine pitch or even clay slurry, they became watertight, airtight, pest-resistant. They were lightweight, portable and stackable. Imagine rows of them lined up, each one sealed tight, their exteriors shining faintly with pitch. These weren't flimsy crafts, they were vaults disguised as weavings. Women who made them weren't just artists, they were engineers, sealing food behind barriers that modern Tupperware could only envy. But the most fascinating method? Underground storage pits. Imagine digging into the earth, scraping a hollow lined with bark or grass, smoothing the walls with clay, laying stones for drainage. Once finished, it became a pantry below ground, cool even in summer, insulated in winter, hidden from sight. Into these pits went baskets or sacks of corn, beans and nuts, carefully layered, then covered with bark, dirt and sometimes even planted over with grass to conceal the cache. From above, it looked like untouched earth. From below, it was a treasure chest. Families knew exactly where these pits lay, and sometimes marked them subtly with stones or sticks. Outsiders might pass by unaware, never realizing that beneath their feet lay months of food, waiting in silence. The genius here was environment. The ground remained cooler and steadier in temperature than the air. Moisture, the eternal enemy, was reduced by drainage layers and bark linings. Pests had to fight through barriers of dirt and stone. And secrecy. That was priceless. Hidden pits meant raiders or enemies couldn't easily plunder supplies. Food security was physical security, and these caches were both practical and tactical. Now, imagine the ritual of opening a storage pit in the dead of winter. Snow lies thick, breath clouds the air, stomachs rumble. A family trudges to the spot, scrapes away snow, digs into the frozen ground, reveals the lid of bark and stone. As they lift it, the smell of dried corn and beans rises, a scent sharp and earthy. It is like unearthing treasure. Children crowd forward, eyes wide, hands reaching. Adults scoop out kernels, beans, nuts. Frozen but still intact, still perfect. It's a moment of joy, proof that foresight has defeated famine. Of course, storage had its mishaps. Clay jars could crack in sudden cold, their contents spilling uselessly onto the ground. Baskets could leak if pitch wasn't applied carefully. Underground pits sometimes flooded after heavy rains, soaking kernels into useless mush. Families cursed, salvaged what they could, and learned to do better next time. Humour softened even disaster. Elders might joke that the spirits were hungry too, claiming their share of the corn. Children teased each other that the earth was eating their food when pits failed. Survival required not just cleverness, but resilience, and laughter was often the last defence. The science behind all this is staggering. Clay sealed oxygen out. Pitch acted like modern plastic wrap, keeping moisture and bugs away. Underground pits mimicked refrigeration, using stable soil temperatures to keep food dry and safe. What archaeologists now call low-tech innovation was, for its time, revolutionary. Entire harvests could be preserved without spoiling, ensuring food not just for a single season but for years. Some pits, rediscovered centuries later, still hold kernels recognizably edible, proof that the methods worked beyond imagination. And think of the symbolism. Storing food wasn't just about calories, it was about hope, about trust in the future. Each kernel poured into a jar was a promise. You will eat when the snow falls. Each sealed basket was reassurance. Hunger will not win this time. Each pit dug was a covenant with the land itself. Bury now, feast later. It was security you could touch, a physical manifestation of foresight. Now, close your eyes and imagine lying in that winter teepee. The fire flickers, robes pile heavy, but hunger gnaws. Then you hear the scrape of a clay lid, the rattle of kernels poured into a pot, the scent of stew rising as beans and corn soften in water. That sound, the clink of kernels against clay, the hiss of boiling broth, was as comforting as the fire's warmth. It was the sound of survival stored and now released. Even trade revolved around storage. A family with abundant jars and pits could trade surplus for hides, tools, or horses. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was currency, leverage, wealth. Hidden pits became banks, jars became vaults, baskets became purses. To lose them was disaster, to guard them was prosperity. And here's the comic side. Imagine explaining to a modern friend that your retirement plan is a hole in the ground filled with beans. They'd laugh until they realised that hole could keep you alive when the shelves are bare. Suddenly it doesn't sound so silly. Native ingenuity was practical first, but its humour echoes even today. Sometimes the simplest plans outlast the fanciest. So why did dried corn and beans endure for decades? Because storage wasn't an afterthought. It was art. It was clay, bark, stone, and earth turned into guardians of life. Because families didn't just eat, they planned, hid, and protected. Because survival wasn't random, it was engineered, one jar, one basket, one pit at a time. The clay jars and hidden pits whisper their promises of survival, but among the stores of dried corn there's another secret waiting, a process so strange, so advanced that modern scientists still marvel at it. This wasn't just storage, it was transformation. The people who lived centuries before microscopes and laboratories had stumbled upon a biochemical miracle. They called it Nixtamalization, though they didn't use that word. To them, it was simply the way corn became not only edible but powerful, the way kernels turned from stubborn nuggets into a food that could nourish bodies for generations without spoiling. Tonight you settle deeper into your robes, the firelight warm on your cheek, as we wander into the quiet brilliance of nixtamalized corn. Imagine the problem first. Corn, dried and hard, could last for decades, but eating it wasn't always easy. Raw kernels were nearly indestructible, their tough shells refusing to soften. Even when ground into meal, corn wasn't perfect. Without something more, it left people sick, weakened by deficiencies. Other parts of the world discovered this centuries later, when diets based on corn alone led to illness, pellagra, weakness, confusion. But native people in the Americas never suffered this plague. Why? Because they had found a solution long before science caught up. They bathed their corn in ash and lime, unknowingly unlocking niacin, the crucial vitamin B3 that lay bound within. Picture the process. A fire burns low, leaving behind a heap of hardwood ash, pale and powdery. Water is poured through it slowly, leaching out alkaline compounds, until a caustic solution forms. Lye water, though no one calls it that yet. Clay pots are filled with dried kernels and this solution, then set over gentle heat. The water simmers, bubbling faintly, its surface shimmering. As the hours pass, something astonishing happens. The tough outer, hulls of the kernels loosen, peel away, the kernels swell, soften, changing colour slightly. When finished, they're rinsed thoroughly, washed and washed again until the bitter caustic traces vanish. What remains is not just corn, it is hominy, soft, fragrant, and transformed. The chemistry is mind-bending. Alkaline treatment frees niacin, making it available for the body to absorb. It also boosts protein quality, makes kernels easier to grind, and even kills compounds that would otherwise cause rancidity. In short, it makes corn more nutritious, more digestible, more storable. A food already eternal in storage is now elevated, protected, empowered. The people who discovered this had no lab coats, no microscopes, no textbooks, but they had observation, patience, and tradition. They noticed that kernels treated with ash or lime kept better, tasted better, and made them healthier. Over time, the method spread, becoming ritual, becoming culture, becoming indispensable. And here's where the humour sneaks in. Imagine someone centuries ago pouring ash water into a pot of corn, watching it bubble and thinking, this seems reasonable. By modern standards, it sounds absurd. Who looks at fireplace ash and thinks, yes, let's cook dinner in that? Yet that leap of experimentation saved entire civilizations. The same friends who laugh at you for burning toast would have starved without these ash-treated kernels. Survival has always required boldness, and sometimes boldness looks a little ridiculous. The result, hominy, was versatile. Ground into masa, it became tortillas, tamales, porridges. It stored beautifully, resisting spoilage better than untreated corn. Its softened texture meant less fuel was needed to cook it, another quiet advantage in winter when wood supplies dwindled, and its taste, nutty, rich, slightly earthy, made it more than survival food. It was comfort, culture, community. The aroma of freshly nixtamalized corn steaming from a pot must have been one of the most reassuring scents of winter. Now close your eyes and picture it. You sit cross-legged by the fire as a pot of hominy simmers. The kernels swell, releasing steam that smells faintly sweet and smoky. A woman stirs with a wooden paddle, humming softly, her motions practiced, steady. Children peer in, eager for the meal to come. When the pot is ladled out, you taste a spoonful, soft, warm, filling. It clings to your ribs, soothes your hunger, strengthens your body. It is not just food, it is medicine disguised as stew, protection disguised as comfort. But beyond nourishment, nixtamalization was a kind of hidden science experiment repeated daily. Different tribes used different alkaline sources, wood ash in some places, lime from burned shells in others. Each variation worked, unlocking the same miracle. Over time, these processes were woven into ceremony. Corn wasn't just a plant, it was a gift, a being with spirit, and the act of treating it, with ash or lime, was as sacred as it was practical. To make hominy was to honour both body and soul. Children sometimes teased that eating hominy meant you were eating fire, since it had been bathed in ash. Others joked that the kernels, stripped of their shells, looked like old men missing their coats. Even survival has room for laughter, and hominy's transformation was ripe for jokes. But beneath the laughter was gratitude, because everyone knew the truth. Without this strange, ash-soaked miracle, winters would be far more cruel. Archaeologists today marvel at this discovery. They call it biochemical genius, a process that modern food science can describe but not improve. Without it, corn-heavy diets led to deficiency and disease in parts of Europe and Africa, where the technique was not adopted. But here, on the plains and in the forests, no such illnesses spread. People thrived because they listened to the land, because they experimented boldly, because they trusted the wisdom passed down in story and song. Nixtamalized corn, dried again after treatment, lasted even longer than untreated kernels. Its compounds resisted rancidity, its softened hulls meant quicker cooking, its improved nutrition meant better survival. Jars of this corn could sit for years, waiting, and still feed you fully. Each kernel was a capsule of endurance, perfected not by accident, but by design. So why did it never expire? Because the people who prepared it rewrote the rules of spoilage. They removed water, yes, but they also altered chemistry itself. They broke down barriers, released hidden nutrients, and turned something ordinary into something extraordinary. They created food that not only endured but improved with treatment, food that sustained bodies and banished disease. And perhaps that is the humbling truth. Survival wasn't only about storage, it was about transformation, about seeing a pile of ash not as waste but as potential, about daring to test, to taste, to trust. It was about turning hardship into opportunity, weakness into strength. The corn jars sit steady in your imagination, but right beside them you notice another treasure, equally vital and just as enduring: beans. At first glance they look plain, small ovals rattling in a clay jar, colours ranging from white to black, from mottled brown to speckled red. Yet within those hard shells lies a secret more powerful than flavour. Beans were the protein powerhouse, the quiet partner that made corn complete. Where corn offered carbohydrates and energy, beans offered the missing amino acids. Together they formed what nutritionists today call a complete protein, a discovery in labs only centuries ago, but known in practice by native communities since time immemorial. Imagine the scene. A harvest day in late summer, bean pods dry and brittle, rattling faintly in the wind. Families walk the rows, plucking them carefully, listening for that rattle. The sound is the dinner bell of preservation. Each pod cracked open reveals seeds smooth and dry like tiny stones. They're spread across mats in single layers, left in the sun and breeze. Any hint of moisture is the enemy. A bean that feels soft can mean rot later. Every single one must be bone dry, hard enough to resist the teeth. The work is meticulous, almost tedious, but every careful step adds years, decades, to the life of the beans. Once dried, beans are stored much like corn. Clay jars with lids sealed in pitch, woven baskets lined with pine resin, underground pits cooled by earth. Each vessel becomes a vault, guarding beans against humidity and pests. When properly stored, they last astonishing lengths of time. Archaeologists have uncovered caches still edible centuries later, their shapes unchanged, their proteins intact. You rattle a jar and it sounds the same whether the beans are 1 year old or 100. A crisp, hard clatter, the sound of food mocking decay. But beans weren't only about storage, they were about synergy. Corn lacked lysine, beans lacked methionine. Together, eaten in stews or breads, they completed each other, forming a nutritional team stronger than either alone. Native communities didn't describe it in scientific terms, but they lived it. They knew that meals combining corn and beans left them stronger, healthier, more resilient. It was biochemical genius disguised as dinner. Now picture a winter lodge where beans are pulled from storage, the fire crackles, a clay pot is filled with water, beans dropped in handful by handful. At first they clatter against the pot, hard as stones, but slowly with heat and time they swell, soften, surrender. Hours pass, steam rises, and soon the air fills with the earthy, nutty scent of beans becoming stew. Cornmeal might be stirred in, thickening the broth. Dried meat added, berries for tartness. Children sit close, noses twitching, stomachs growling. When ladles finally dip, the first spoonful is pure comfort. Soft beans that taste fresh again, as if they hadn't spent years in a jar. The endurance of beans is almost comical compared to modern foods. Today we worry if a bag of lentils in the pantry has gone stale after a few months. Yet here were beans, stored in clay or bark, sitting untouched for decades, waiting patiently, still capable of rehydrating into nourishing meals. They were stubborn little seeds, refusing to give bacteria any foothold, laughing at the concept of expiration. A modern protein powder brags about a shelf life of 2 years. Beans stored by native families outlasted lifetimes. Humour found its way here too. Children teased each other that the beans were harder than teeth when raw, daring one another to bite them before cooking. Elders joked that the sound of rattling beans in a jar was music, the drumbeat of the kitchen. Families knew beans brought not only strength, but also, let's admit it, a fair bit of windiness after eating. Jokes about that filled the long winter nights, laughter rising even as bellies filled. Survival never lost its sense of comedy. Different varieties were cherished across regions. Tepary beans in the southwest were nearly indestructible, perfectly adapted to arid climates. Lima beans, larger and richer, needed more care in drying but rewarded with flavour. Black beans, pinto beans, white beans, each offered subtle differences in taste and cooking, but all shared the same miraculous durability. Together they created diversity within abundance, flavours rotating even when supplies seemed limited. The storage systems also had regional flair. In the southwest, beans often went into clay ollars, their narrow necks keeping pests out. In the plains, woven baskets sealed with pitch became the norm. In northern woodlands, underground pits worked best, the cool soil protecting against both moisture and curious animals. Each solution fit the landscape, a harmony between food and environment. The symbolism of beans went deeper. They weren't just seeds for eating, they were seeds for planting. Families always set some aside for spring. These beans carried more than nutrition, they carried hope. To plant a bean was to trust the cycle, to believe in another harvest. Eating beans fed the body. Saving beans fed the future. They were both meal and memory, nourishment and promise. Now, as you lie beneath your blankets tonight, picture a jar of beans being poured into a pot. The sound is sharp at first, clink, 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 but slowly replaced by the bubbling of water, the hiss of steam, the crackle of firewood. Hours later the smell fills the lodge, heavy and rich, the kind of scent that makes your mouth water even before the first bite. You take a spoonful, and the bean melts on your tongue, soft, hearty, filling. It's more than food, it's survival disguised as comfort. Modern cooks might marvel at the patience required, soaking, boiling, simmering. But that patience was part of the rhythm. Food wasn't instant, but it was eternal. Beans taught families to wait, to trust that time and fire could transform hardness into nourishment. And maybe that's the quiet lesson here. Some of the best things, whether food or survival or even rest, come slowly, softened by time. So why did beans never expire? Because every drop of moisture was removed before storage. Because vessels were sealed with care, pits dug with precision. Because their very shells, hard and protective, acted like natural armour. Because people respected them, guarded them, treated them not as afterthoughts but as lifelines. Beans were more than seeds. They were resilience in a jar. The jars of beans sit quiet in your mind, their rattling echo fading, but the fire crackles and draws your gaze to another form of survival brilliance. Long racks built outside the teepee, poles strung between posts, strips of meat hanging like banners in the wind. This was Jerky, the original portable. Protein, the food that mocked spoilage and sneered at hunger, lean strips of meat turned into survival leather. If Pemmican was the dense, greasy brick of endurance, Jerky was its lighter, tougher cousin, the snack that warriors and travellers could chew for days, a strip of determination disguised as food. Imagine the beginning of the process. A hunt is successful. Buffalo, deer, elk, or smaller game carried back. The animals are skinned, hides, stretched for later use, bones set aside for tools, but the meat? That must be preserved before it spoils. The best cuts are selected for Jerky, the leanest muscles, free from fat and gristle. Fat is the enemy here. Fat spoils quickly, turning rancid, so every sliver must be trimmed away. Hunters work carefully with sharp knives, slicing long strips about 1/4 inch thick. Too thick, and the meat won't dry all the way. Too thin, and it crumbles to nothing. Each strip is uniform, precise. It's less butchery, more artistry. The racks rise like skeletons of fences, wooden frames designed for air to flow freely. Strips of meat are draped across them, hundreds at a time, like scarlet banners fluttering in the wind. The prairie sun blazes, the air dry, the wind constant. For days the meat hangs, slowly losing its water, fibres tightening, flesh darkening. Sometimes smoke from small fires drifts beneath the racks. Not hot enough to cook, but steady enough to ward off insects and add a smoky flavour. Each passing day the strips grow tougher, lighter, transformed. By the 3rd or 4th day, they are ready. A finished piece of jerky is hard, almost brittle, bending only slightly before cracking. When you bite it, it resists fiercely, making your jaw work until it surrenders. It doesn't spoil, doesn't rot. It can sit for months, even years, if kept dry. Warriors carried it in parfleche bags made of rawhide slung from saddles or belts. Traders packed it into bundles. Families stacked it in storage pits. Wherever people travelled, Jerky went with them, the most reliable companion on the trail. Now picture a warrior on horseback, miles from home, snow drifting across the plains. He stops only briefly, pulls a strip of jerky from his pouch, chews it slowly as his horse stamps impatiently. It takes effort to eat, his jaw aching, but the protein and energy sustain him. That strip of jerky might be the only thing keeping him upright in the storm. It isn't glamorous, it isn't soft, but it works. Humour, of course, found its place here too. Elders joked that jerky was meat that fought back, food that gave your jaw a workout long before modern gyms. Children sometimes tried to chew it raw, only to spit it out defeated. Others used strips like makeshift toys, ropes, whips, even bookmarks for bark paper manuscripts. Jerky was versatile, if not exactly delicate. You could gnaw it, soak it in broth to soften, grind it into powder for pemmican. It was food that bent to your needs, whether you were feasting at camp or starving on the trail. The process required patience, but it was also deeply social. Families gathered to slice, hang, watch. They laughed together when wind whipped strips into unexpected tangles. They cursed when sudden rain threatened, rushing to cover racks. They teased each other about uneven cuts, about meat stolen by wandering dogs. Jerky making wasn't just work. It was ritual, community, memory. Every strip represented both survival and story. Scientifically, jerky was brilliant for the same reason as pemmican: moisture control. By driving out water, people stripped bacteria of their foothold. By keeping fat minimal, they denied rancidity a chance. By storing it in airtight containers, they shut out pests. It wasn't just food dried in the sun, it was food engineered to laugh at time. Modern jerky, packed in plastic with expiration dates of a year or two, pales in comparison. Properly made native jerky could last longer than the hunter who sliced it. Imagine tasting it now. You hold a strip, dark, leathery, smelling faintly of smoke. You bite, and it resists, fibres stretching before snapping. The flavour is intense, concentrated meatiness, smoky and primal. It fills your mouth slowly, releasing strength bite by bite. You chew for minutes, maybe longer, but as you do, you feel energy rising, hunger quieting. This isn't snacking, it's survival. And as you swallow, you understand why this food was cherished, why it became indispensable. Jerky also became a trade item. Hunters exchanged bundles for tools, hides, or even horses. It was portable wealth, edible currency, valued because everyone knew its worth. You could carry jerky across mountains, down rivers, through snowstorms, and it would still be there, unchanged, waiting. To own jerky was to own security, and symbolically, jerky represented endurance. Soft food spoiled, luxuries faded, but jerky endured, as stubborn and resilient as the people who made it. It was food that mirrored its makers, tough, patient, resistant to time. Eating jerky was more than feeding the body, it was embodying resilience itself. There were variations, of course. Some tribes flavoured strips with herbs or smoke from particular woods, adding unique scents and tastes. Others pounded jerky into powders, mixing it into soups. Some saved only the leanest cuts, creating jerky so pure it seemed eternal. Everywhere, though, the principle was the same. Cut, dry, guard, repeat, survive. Now, as you lie under your blanket, picture those racks outside the teepee, strips swaying in the wind. The sun beats down, the air carries the scent of drying meat. The sound of laughter rises as families work together. Later, the strips will be gathered, packed, stored in rawhide bags. They will sit silently for months, perhaps years, waiting. And one night when hunger claws too fiercely, they will be pulled out, chewed slowly, and once again save lives. Jerky never. Expired because it was crafted with care. Because patience stripped it of weakness. Because families respected it, guarded it, relied on it. Jerky was more than dried meat. It was a philosophy, a reminder that strength comes not from abundance, but from endurance. The racks of jerky sway in your mind's eye, leathery banners of survival, but not far from them another kind of treasure gleams faintly in the firelight. Baskets filled with hard-shelled jewels, hickory nuts, walnuts, acorns, pecans, nature's own survival packages. You pick one up, roll it in your palm and marvel at its design. No clay jar, no woven basket, no pitch-sealed lid. Just a shell, smooth and hard, crafted by evolution to guard the life inside. Native communities knew this gift intimately. Nuts weren't just snacks gathered in autumn. They were compact bundles of fat and protein, food that could last for years, hidden inside armour stronger than any pottery. Imagine a fall day in the eastern woodlands. Leaves blaze orange and red, the air crisp, the ground scattered with fallen nuts. Families move through the trees, baskets slung over their shoulders, bending to collect the bounty. The harvest is a race. Squirrels scurry madly, stuffing cheeks, burying stashes. Humans laugh, teasing that the squirrels are rivals, but in truth both know the same fact. Nuts are gold. Thick shells, low moisture, dense nutrition. They're treasures of survival. Hickory nuts in particular were champions. Their shells were so hard that cracking them required stones, hammers, sometimes even fire. But inside, rich oily kernels that stayed fresh for years. Walnuts too, stored beautifully, their dark shells resisting pests. Pecans in the south, smoother, easier to crack, but just as durable. And acorns, more complicated, yes, with their bitter tannins, but once processed they became flour that could be stored almost indefinitely. Each nut had its quirks, but all shared the same advantage. They came prepackaged by nature, ready for the pantry before the pantry was even built. Harvesting required skill. The best nuts were those that had dried on the tree and fallen naturally. Those scooped up quickly from the ground stayed clean and dry. Those left too long absorbed moisture and spoiled. Families moved fast, children racing each other to grab fallen nuts before squirrels carried them off. Elders chose carefully, discarding cracked shells or discoloured husks. The work was playful but serious. Every nut gathered meant another mouth fed in January, another stew thickened, another famine staved off. Acorns, though bitter, offered their own form of genius. The tannins that made them unpalatable also made them resistant to pests and rot. Processing turned challenge into triumph. Acorns were cracked, their meat ground into coarse meal, then leached repeatedly with water to wash away bitterness. The result was nut flour, mild, versatile, nutritious. Stored in bark containers or clay jars, it could last years, ready to be baked into bread or stirred into soups. What seemed at first to be unusable became a staple, thanks to patience and knowledge. Now picture a winter night in a lodge. Snow drifts high, the wind howls. A basket of hickory nuts is pulled close to the fire. Children sit cross-legged, each with a stone, cracking shells one by one, prying out kernels with bone picks. The sound is rhythmic. Crack, pick, crunch, laughter. Adults grind some nuts into paste, others eat them raw. The taste is rich, oily, satisfying. It clings to the tongue, fills the stomach, brings warmth. A handful of nuts might provide as much energy as a full meal of corn or beans. Fat is fuel, and in winter, fuel is life. Humour played its role too. Someone always cracked a nut only to find it empty, or worse, filled with a worm. Groans and laughter followed, jokes traded about protein bonus. Children mimicked squirrels, cheeks puffed out with kernels, tails of twigs stuck behind them. Elders teased that those who ate too many nuts would start climbing trees. Even survival foods carried playfulness. When life is harsh, laughter is another kind of nourishment. Storage was simple yet brilliant. Nuts were kept in their shells whenever possible, the best protection of all. Stored in baskets or pits, they remained edible for years. Some families buried large caches, hiding them from animals and enemies alike. Others strung them up in lodges, baskets hung from rafters, where smoke from fires added another layer of preservation. Hickory nuts, with their thick shells, could sit untouched for a decade and still crack open fresh. Walnuts stored almost as long. Pecans, though softer, could last several seasons. Even acorn flour, once dried, resisted spoilage for years when sealed, and the symbolism? Nuts represented patience and reward. You worked to crack them, to leach them, to grind them. They reminded you that survival required effort, that nothing came without labour. Yet they also represented abundance. Trees dropping food freely, season after season, a gift that only needed gathering. Some stories even personified nuts as stubborn old spirits, guarding their treasure until you proved worthy with stones and persistence. Nutritionally, they were unmatched. Proteins, fats, vitamins, all packed in small shells. When combined with corn and beans, nuts added richness, variety and energy. They provided oils for cooking, paste for flavour, even medicinal uses in some traditions. They weren't just emergency food, they were essential, valued, celebrated. Imagine now cracking a hickory nut by firelight, the shell splinters under your stone, fragments scattering, and inside the kernel gleams pale and perfect. You pop it into your mouth, it tastes sweet, buttery, faintly smoky from the fire. It melts slowly, coating your tongue, leaving you full in a way corn alone never could. You lean back, satisfied, knowing that dozens more sit waiting in baskets, patient as stones, ready whenever hunger calls. The durability was astounding. While fresh fruit rotted in days, while meat spoiled in hours without treatment, nuts in their shells outlasted seasons, sometimes generations. A child born during the harvest might crack nuts gathered before they were born. Food as inheritance passed forward in shells. So why did nuts never expire? Because nature gave them armour. Because people harvested carefully, stored wisely, respected the gift. Because thick shells, low moisture, and patient traditions turned them into treasures. They were survival without technology, abundance without decay. Nuts were more than snacks. They were life, sealed by trees, cracked open by hands, stored by families who knew that patience and planning were the real weapons against hunger. And as the firelight flickers lower, you realize that each shell is a story, each kernel a promise. They remind you that survival is not always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's small, hard, hidden, and eternal. The baskets of nuts clatter faintly in your imagination, shells guarding their treasure, but beside them another kind of seed waits quietly in woven pouches. These are smaller, darker, lighter to carry, yet they hold a power just as astonishing: sunflower seeds. To most of us today, they're a casual snack you crack during a baseball game or toss on top of a salad. But to native peoples of North America, sunflowers were nothing less than a miracle crop. America's first domesticated superfood, perfected thousands of years before the word superfood ever entered a grocery aisle. Imagine a summer field long before roads or fences. Towering stalks of sunflowers sway, their broad heads following the arc of the sun across the sky. Each head is massive, hundreds of seeds arranged in a perfect spiral, a geometric marvel nature never fails to flaunt. These weren't accidental patches of wild plants, they were the product of generations of careful selection. Native farmers chose the strongest, the tallest, the most seed-laden sunflowers, replanting their offspring until they had varieties that outperformed anything nature had originally offered. What you see in that field is not random beauty. It's agriculture at its most elegant. Harvest required timing as precise as any clock. Too soon, and the seeds lacked oil, shriveled and pale. Too late, and the heads drooped, scattering seeds to the ground or feeding flocks of birds. Families watched the sunflowers carefully, noting when the backs of the heads turned yellow, when seeds loosened slightly but still clung tight. Then the work began. Heads were cut with stone blades, stacked in piles, carried back to lodges or drying racks. The sight of dozens of sunflower heads wide as shields must have looked like nature's pantry made visible. Processing was simple but laborious. Heads were laid out to dry, sometimes in the sun, sometimes near gentle fires. Once crisp, they were beaten or rubbed against rough surfaces to release the seeds. Hundreds rained down, clicking into baskets, spilling like black and white jewels. Children helped, laughing as they scooped handfuls, some sneaking seeds into their mouths despite reminders to save them. The air smelled faintly resinous, earthy, alive with the crackle of dry sunflower husks. The seeds themselves were powerhouses. Packed with oil, protein, and essential minerals, they provided concentrated energy unmatched by most other crops. Roasting them drove off residual moisture, enhanced flavor, and made their oils more stable. Stored in clay jars or bark containers, they lasted for years. The natural shell protected them from pests, and their low moisture content made bacteria irrelevant. Modern sunflower seeds come stamped with expiration dates, but traditional ones, properly harvested and roasted, laughed at the calendar, staying edible longer than the wooden containers that held them. Now picture a winter evening in the teepee. A basket of roasted sunflower seeds is passed around, the shells faintly smoky, the kernels nutty and rich. You crack them between your teeth, the taste spreading warmly across your tongue. They're small, yes, but handful by handful they fuel you, filling you with fats and energy at a time when the body needs it most. Outside the snow howls, inside your lips shine faintly with oil, a reminder that these seeds carry more than calories, they carry survival. Humour found its way here too. Children sometimes invented contests. Who could crack the most seeds without dropping them? Who could spit shells the farthest? Elders teased that sunflower seeds were for chatterboxes, since your mouth was always busy cracking. Someone inevitably spilled a basket, seeds scattering into every crack of the lodge floor, and for weeks afterward kernels would appear in unexpected places, discovered by bare feet or mischievous dogs. Survival wasn't always solemn. It rattled with laughter, as often as it rattled with seeds. Sunflowers weren't only food. Their oil was medicine, rubbed into skin as protection against wind and frost. Their stalks, fibrous and tough, became materials for weaving and cordage. Their bright yellow heads carried spiritual meaning, symbols of the sun itself, reminders that even in the dead of winter, light and warmth would return. A bowl of sunflower seeds wasn't just calories, it was hope, tradition, and medicine combined. And the agricultural brilliance cannot be overstated. Thousands of years before industrial plant breeding, native farmers engineered sunflowers into high-yield, large-seeded varieties. What began as wild plants with tiny scattered seeds became domesticated giants producing enough food to feed families for generations. That kind of patient selection is science without microscopes, genetics without textbooks, a legacy still visible every time we crack a modern sunflower seed. Imagine the storage scene. Clay jars lined along a wall, each filled to the brim with roasted seeds. The kernels inside are dry, safe, waiting. A jar could be opened years later, and the seeds inside would still crunch, still taste nutty, still shine with oil. Compare that to the flimsy bags we buy today, half spoiled in months. The contrast is almost comical. While we wring our hands about expiration dates, these seeds sit smugly in silence, perfectly preserved by nothing more than air, fire, and patience. The symbolism deepens. Sunflowers always face the sun, turning their massive heads east to west through the day. For many native peoples, this was a lesson. Follow the light, follow warmth, follow life. To eat sunflower seeds in winter was to eat the memory of summer itself, to place a little bit of sunlight into your mouth. Imagine that sensation. You crack a seed as snow rattles against the lodge, and for a moment you taste sunlight trapped in oil, captured months ago, carried safely through the storm. And yes, there were jokes about them too. Some people teased that if you ate too many sunflower seeds, you'd start turning your head back and forth like the flowers themselves, forever chasing light. Others joked that sunflower oil made your skin so shiny you could guide hunters home in the dark. Humour softened the grind, kept spirits high, and made each handful taste brighter. Nutritionally, sunflower seeds were essential. Rich in fats, critical in a diet where winter could lean too heavily on lean meats or starchy grains, they balanced meals. They provided vitamin E, minerals, and protein. Mixed into stews, ground into pastes, or eaten roasted by the handful, they added variety and strength. They weren't filler food, they were fuel. Now close your eyes and picture it. Baskets of seeds, jars sealed tight, children cracking shells by firelight, adults grinding kernels into paste for cooking. The air smells nutty, warm, faintly smoky. Outside, the prairie lies frozen, but inside, life persists. The seeds that once turned their faces to the sun now keep your body warm through the night. You crack another shell, savour another kernel, and feel the lesson settle over you. Survival is not only about bulk or weight. Sometimes it comes in tiny packages, patient and powerful, waiting quietly until you need them most. So why did sunflower seeds never expire? Because every step, from timing the harvest to careful drying to roasting and sealing, was perfected. Because nature's shell worked as well as any crafted jar. Because people respected the gift, storing it with care, guarding it with foresight. The seeds endured because they were treated as treasures, not trifles. And as you drift tonight, hear the faint click of seeds spilling into a bowl, the laughter of children cracking shells, the rustle of stalks swaying in summer fields long gone. Taste the sunlight trapped inside each kernel, the warmth of oil sliding across your tongue. Feel the reassurance, even in darkness, even in cold, the sun can be stored, preserved, eaten. Sunflower seeds weren't just food, they were bottled summer, portable light, eternal warmth disguised as kernels. The jars of sunflower seeds glimmer faintly in your imagination, their oils promising energy, but beside them rests another treasure, small, wrinkled, colourful, and deceptively fragile looking. These are dried berries, the closest thing ancient families had to a medicine cabinet. Cranberries, chokecherries, blueberries, strawberries, each gathered in summer's abundance, then transformed into winter's salvation. To modern eyes, they might look like snacks, sweet little bursts of flavour. But to native peoples, they were vitamins preserved in leather-like skins, a shield against disease, and proof that even the most delicate fruits could be taught to defy time. Imagine a summer meadow, the air buzzing with insects, sunlight sharp and bright. Children scatter across berry patches, baskets in hand, lips already stained with juice. Adults kneel, moving carefully, picking ripe berries while watching the sky for birds that swoop in for their share. Every handful gathered is a race against time. Berries rot fast, mould faster, vanish in days if left fresh. But in careful hands, they become something else entirely. Food that lasts not weeks, not months, but years. The process was deceptively simple. Remove water, Spread berries on woven mats, bark sheets, or racks raised above the ground. Let sun and wind strip away moisture, or place them near slow, smoky fires for extra insurance. Hours stretch into days. The berries shrivel, darken, wrinkle. They look less appealing now, their plump juiciness gone. But that transformation is everything. Water gone means bacteria gone. Moisture gone means spoilage gone. What remains is concentrated flavour, concentrated sugar, concentrated nutrition. Cranberries were stars of the show. Their natural waxy coating and acidic bite made them resistant to mould and rot even before drying. Once shriveled, they became nearly indestructible. A handful could sit in a bark container for decades and still taste tart, sharp, alive. Chokecherries, another favourite, often took a different form. Entire berries, pits and all, were crushed into pulp, spread into flat cakes and left to dry. The result was rock-hard chokecherry cakes dark as midnight, so tough they had to be broken with stones. Bite into one, and you tasted both fruit and pit, astringent but strangely satisfying, a vitamin-packed block that lasted longer than some settlements. Blueberries, too, were gathered in quantity, dried into chewy nuggets that could be eaten plain or stirred into porridges. Strawberries, more delicate, were dried quickly in thin layers, their sweetness preserved like whispers of summer. All of them, once dried, became treasures. Families stored them in birch bark containers, the bark naturally, waterproof and pest-resistant. These packages were lightweight, portable, nearly indestructible. A sailor in Europe might die of scurvy on a long voyage, his diet stripped of vitamin C, while a native family in winter crunched on dried cranberries gathered months ago, their health quietly preserved. Now, picture a winter night. The fire glows low, the air sharp with cold. A basket of dried berries is pulled from storage. Children's eyes widen. They remember picking these under summer sun, when days were warm and endless. Now, in the heart of winter, the berries taste like memory itself. A few are dropped into stew, rehydrating into bursts of flavour. Others are chewed as they are, their tangy sweetness a relief from the heaviness of meat and grain. They don't just feed the body, they feed the spirit, reminding everyone that summer will come again. Humour slipped in too. Children joked that chokecherry cakes were rocks you could eat, daring each other to gnaw the hardest pieces. Elders teased that cranberries were so sour they'd turn your face inside out if you ate too many at once. Someone always tried to sneak more than their share, staining lips red or purple, only to be caught with the evidence smeared across their chin. Even in scarcity, berries brought joy, laughter, colour. The science was brilliant, though unspoken. Fresh berries are nearly 90% water, a perfect playground for bacteria. Dry them, and suddenly they become unfriendly terrain for decay. Add their natural acids and antioxidants, and you've created not just food, but medicine. Modern nutritionists praise berries for fighting inflammation, strengthening immunity, supporting the heart. Centuries ago, families didn't need studies. They had proof in their survival. Winters passed, illnesses averted, strength preserved, all because someone had bent low in summer fields, gathered baskets, and laid fruit to dry. Chokecherry cakes deserve a closer look. Their pits contained compounds with mild medicinal properties, sometimes even used in remedies for coughs. Crushing and drying them into cakes preserved more than flavour. It preserved pharmacology hidden in the plant. These cakes were added to stews, softened in boiling water, broken into chunks for long journeys. They were as close to multivitamins as the pre-modern world ever saw. And they lasted forever, so hard and dry that decades later they could still be chewed with effort, their nutrients intact. Storage was as ingenious as ever. Birch bark containers, stitched and folded, kept dried berries dry yet breathable. Animal skin pouches worked too, tied tight and hung from rafters. Underground pits lined with bark added another layer of cool preservation. Wherever stored, the goal was the same: no moisture, no pests, no spoilage. And it worked. Stories exist of dried berry caches discovered years later, still edible, still flavourful. Nature and tradition working together created fruit that defied time. Now imagine holding a handful of dried cranberries. They're wrinkled, dark, tough between your fingers. You place one on your tongue, bite gently, and the tartness explodes, sharp and bright. It wakes you, cuts through the heaviness of winter meals. Another berry, sweeter, chewy, fills your mouth with echoes of summer fields. You close your eyes, and for a moment the snow outside vanishes, replaced by sunlit meadows and buzzing insects. That's the gift of dried berries. They're not just nutrients, they're memories preserved, hope condensed into tiny shriveled jewels. Modern life offers fruit snacks and vitamin gummies, packaged in bright wrappers, expiration dates stamped in bold. But compare them to chokecherry cakes, to cranberries dried on bark, to blueberries stored in birch bark boxes. Those ancient foods didn't expire in months. They endured for decades. They didn't need preservatives. They were preservers themselves. Survivalists today still dry berries, still admire the technique, but even they admit the old ways did it better. And so, why did dried berries never expire? Because water was stripped away, acids and natural compounds guarded them, and storage vessels kept them safe. Because people respected the fruit, gathered it carefully, preserved it with patience. Because survival demanded it, and tradition delivered. Now, as your eyes grow heavy, picture baskets of berries by the fire, children giggling, elders chewing slowly, stew simmering with bursts of tart sweetness. Picture the colours: deep red cranberries, dark choke cherries, dusty blueberries, bright jewels in a world of snow and smoke. Taste the tang, feel the chew, and let the memory of summer rest on your tongue. Dried berries weren't just food, they were vitamins, medicine, joy, and hope, sealed by sun and wind, waiting patiently through the cold. The dark jewels of dried berries still glimmer in your mind, tart and wrinkled, but beside them sits a different treasure entirely. Blocks that sparkle faintly in the firelight, crystalline, hard, and impossibly sweet. These are maple sugar bricks, the original energy bars, the candy of the forest, the miracle that turned sap into solid gold. In a world where sweetness was rare, these bricks were more than food. They were delight, medicine, and survival condensed into blocks that could last forever without spoiling. Imagine holding one in your palm, rough-edged, pale brown, faintly sticky, and realizing you are cradling sunlight itself captured in the veins of trees. It began in late winter, when the world was still cold, snow still deep, but days growing longer. Families watched the maples closely. When nights froze but days warmed, sap began to flow. Tapping required skill. Holes were carved with stone or bone tools, sometimes iron after trade, and wooden spouts were fitted into place. Buckets of bark or hollowed logs were placed beneath to catch the dripping sap. Clear as water, it looked deceptively plain. But inside that sap was sweetness, faint but powerful, waiting to be coaxed out. Collecting sap was relentless. Drip by drip, bucket by bucket, families gathered gallons. 40 gallons to make just 1 gallon of syrup. Children carried smaller buckets, sloshing and laughing, while adults trudged with heavier loads. Camp smelled faintly of damp wood and fresh sap, a perfume of forest renewal. Fires burned constantly, because boiling was the only way to transform liquid into sweetness. Huge kettles or clay pots were set over flames, sap poured in, bubbling steadily. The steam rose in clouds, carrying a sugary scent that clung to hair and clothing. Hours stretched into days. Sap boiled and boiled, evaporating water, concentrating sugar. It was hard work. Fires needed tending constantly. Kettles stirred to prevent scorching. Elders joked that maple sugar season was a test of patience, where you traded sleep for sweetness. But the reward was worth it. Syrup thickened, darkened, grew rich. For some, that was enough. Liquid syrup poured into containers, still valuable, still sweet. But to make it eternal, it had to go further. Syrup boiled until it crystallized, sugar forming solid blocks. These were poured into molds, sometimes carved from wood or simply pressed into rough loaves. When cooled, they hardened into bricks, sturdy, portable, immune to decay. Picture the moment a block was lifted from its mold. It sparkled faintly in firelight, a chunk of crystallized sunlight. Bite into it, and it crunched between your teeth, then melted instantly, flooding your mouth with pure sweetness. No berry, no nut, no grain could compare. Maple sugar was joy, concentrated. Children begged for it. Adults rationed it carefully, knowing how precious it was. Stored in bark wrappers, In wooden boxes, in clay jars, it could last indefinitely, its low moisture and high sugar content making it hostile to bacteria. While other foods mocked time, maple sugar bricks laughed at it, secure in their crystalline armour. Now, imagine a winter lodge where food is heavy, meat, beans, corn, all filling but plain. Someone unwraps a sugar brick, shaves off small pieces, drops them into a pot of cornmeal mush. The bland porridge transforms instantly, sweetness spreading through every spoonful. Children grin, adults sigh with pleasure. In that moment, life is not just survival, it is celebration. Sugar doesn't only feed the body, it lifts the spirit. Humour surrounded sugar too. Elders teased that too much would make children bounce like deer, or rot their teeth before they grew old. Someone always tried to sneak extra bites, only to be caught with sticky fingers. Jokes compared sugar to magic, sap that pretends to be water then turns into candy if you trick it long enough. Even work around the boiling kettles carried jokes. When sap foamed too high, children blew on it dramatically, claiming their breath kept it calm. Laughter, blended with steam and hard labour, became something brighter. The cultural symbolism ran deep. Maple trees were gifts, tapped with rituals of gratitude. The first drops of sap might be offered back to the earth or to the fire, a sign of respect. Stories told of spirits teaching humans how to boil sap, warning them not to grow lazy. In some tales, sap once flowed thick as syrup from the tree, but people grew slothful, drinking it straight without effort. Angered, the spirits diluted it into watery sap, forcing humans to work for their sweetness. A lesson: value comes from effort, not ease. Nutritionally, sugar bricks were more than treats. They provided fast energy, quick calories for hunters and travellers. In winter, when heavy meals dominated, a shard of sugar gave the body fuel to keep moving. Combined with dried meat or nuts, it created balanced, powerful snacks. And because sugar is naturally antimicrobial in high concentrations, bricks stayed safe indefinitely. They didn't mould, didn't sour, didn't fade. They were immortal candy bars wrapped in birch bark instead of plastic. Imagine tasting one now. You hold the block, rough and firm, chip off a piece. It crunches, then dissolves, flooding your tongue with rich, woodsy sweetness. It tastes both simple and complex, sweeter than fruit, deeper than honey, carrying the faint echo of smoke from the boiling fires. You close your eyes, savouring it, and for a moment winter vanishes, replaced by the sunlit forest where sap first dripped from the trees. That's what maple sugar carried, not just calories, but memory, joy, promise. The durability was almost absurd. Colonists arriving from Europe paid fortunes for cane sugar shipped across oceans, fragile and prone to clumping. Meanwhile, native families stacked maple bricks in storage, knowing they would outlast storms, seasons, even lifetimes. Archaeologists have found remnants still crystalline centuries later. Imagine unwrapping a sugar brick older than your great-grandparents, tasting it, and realizing it still melts sweetly on your tongue. That's immortality in food form. Storage methods were ingenious. Bricks wrapped in birch bark stayed dry, safe from pests. Wooden containers stacked them neatly, their contents hidden and secure. Some were buried in pits, stored like treasure. Families guarded them, knowing how valuable they were for trade. A sugar brick could be exchanged for hides, tools, or food. Sweetness became currency, wealth you could eat. Now picture a trader arriving in a distant village, unwrapping a bundle of sugar bricks. Eyes widen, hands reach. Deals are struck quickly, the bricks changing hands like gold. Sweetness was rare, precious, irresistible. Maple sugar wasn't just food. It was economy, leverage, influence. And the humour continued even there. Traders joked that sugar bricks could buy more friends than stories, or that anyone with a brick suddenly became the most popular person at the fire. Children teased that sugar was magic tree blood, hardened into candy. Even when traded, sugar carried laughter, stories, delight. So why did maple sugar bricks never expire? Because boiling drove out moisture, leaving crystals that bacteria couldn't touch. Because storage wrapped them safe. Because sweetness itself is preservative. They endured because they were crafted with patience, guarded with reverence, and shared with joy. As your eyes grow heavy tonight, picture the boiling kettles steaming in late winter woods. Picture families carrying buckets, Children laughing, smoke rising, syrup thickening. Picture the moment the first brick hardened, cool and solid, sweetness captured forever. Taste the crunch, the melt, the burst of joy. Let it linger on your tongue as the fire fades, as snow drifts outside. Maple sugar bricks weren't just food. They were miracles, proof that even in the harshest winters, sweetness could be preserved, joy could endure, and hope could be eaten. The sugar bricks sparkle faintly in your mind, sweetness solidified into immortality, but just beside them lies something humbler, almost invisible until you know where to look. Not shiny, not glamorous, not bursting with obvious flavour, just tough little roots tucked beneath the prairie soil. These are prairie turnips, also called timpsala by the Lakota, sin by the Omaha, breadroot by settlers, and to the people of the Great Plains, they were nothing short of underground treasure. They didn't arrive in baskets dropped from trees. They weren't flashy like berries or luxurious like sugar. They were hidden, stubborn, and essential. Prairie turnips taught people to look closely, to know the land intimately, and to dig deep, literally for survival. Imagine early summer on the Great Plains. The grass is tall, rolling in waves across endless horizons, the wind bending it like water. Here and there, if you look carefully, a modest vine sprawls across the ground, delicate purple flowers blooming. To the untrained eye, it's just another plant. To those who know, it's a signpost. Beneath that unremarkable vine lies the true prize, a thick, starchy root swelling with nutrition. Prairie turnips appear plain above ground, but to native gatherers, those flowers were as clear as neon signs flashing food here. Harvesting them required skill and timing. If you dug too early, the roots were small and underdeveloped, barely worth the effort. If you waited too long, they turned woody and tough, nearly inedible. Early summer was the sweet spot when the roots were fully formed but still tender enough to slice. Women, often the primary gatherers, carried digging sticks fashioned from sturdy wood or bone, sharpened and hardened in fire. With practiced hands, they pushed the sticks into the soil, pried up clumps of earth, and pulled out the roots, pale, oblong, sometimes the size of a fist. Each one was brushed free of dirt, its outer skin peeled away to reveal the starchy heart inside. And here's where the genius began. Fresh prairie turnips could be eaten raw, their taste somewhere between a potato and a radish, crisp and earthy, but fresh meant fleeting. To turn them into survival food, they had to be dried. Roots were sliced thin, like coins, laid out on racks or woven mats, left in the hot prairie sun to lose every drop of moisture. Slowly they hardened, turning translucent, almost like shards of glass. Pick one up, and it would clink faintly against others, no softness left. Once completely dry, they could last for years, decades even, their nutrients locked away, waiting to be awakened in boiling water. Imagine a line of drying racks outside a summer camp, dozens of sliced roots glinting in the sun, their surfaces catching the light, fluttering slightly in the breeze. Children wander by, tempted to sneak a slice, only to find it rock hard, impossible to chew. Adults laugh, reminding them that these slices aren't for now, they're for the winters to come, when snow covers the plains and game grows scarce. The sight of those drying racks was reassurance, visible proof that tomorrow would be fed. Once dried, prairie turnips were stored in the usual genius ways: clay jars, bark-lined baskets, underground caches. Their hardness made them nearly impervious to pests. Rodents might try, but the effort usually wasn't worth it. Moisture was the only real threat, so containers were carefully sealed, pits lined with bark and stone to keep dampness out. In dry, cool conditions, these roots became nearly eternal. Generations passed them down, children eating slices dug by their grandparents, food as inheritance dug from soil, sliced by hands, preserved by sun. Now, picture a winter night on the plains. The tippy walls creak under the weight of snow, the wind howls outside. Inside, someone pulls a pouch of prairie turnip slices from storage. They're hard as stone, pale and translucent. Dropped into boiling water, they soften slowly, swelling, releasing a faintly sweet, earthy aroma. Bits of dried meat might be added, maybe some beans or corn. The stew thickens, hearty and filling. You lift a spoonful to your lips, taste the softened turnip. Tender now, slightly nutty, a flavour both humble and comforting. Each bite is proof that foresight won over famine. Humour slipped in, as always. Children teased that dried prairie turnips were rocks for dinner, laughing as they clinked slices together like coins. Elders joked that chewing them raw would break your teeth faster than fighting a buffalo. Some even compared them to currency. Hard, valuable, tradable, and in truth, prairie turnips often were traded. Portable, long-lasting, and nourishing, they travelled from camp to camp, exchanged for hides, tools, or other foods. Survival wasn't only about eating, it was about sharing, about building networks of security. Nutritionally, prairie turnips were powerhouses, rich in carbohydrates, fibre, and vitamins. They filled gaps in winter diets heavy with protein and fat. They provided energy for long hunts, sustenance for children, and balance for meals dominated by dried meat. In some ways, they were the perfect counterpart to pemmican, one dense with fat and protein, the other offering starch and fibre. Together they created balance, variety, endurance. The symbolism of prairie turnips ran deep. They were hidden treasures, invisible until you knew how to look. Gathering them required knowledge passed down carefully, where vines grew, when flowers bloomed, how deep roots stretched. To dig them was to honour tradition, to remember the wisdom of ancestors. They taught patience, observation, humility. You couldn't simply grab them. You had to earn them, to kneel in the dirt, to dig carefully. In that sense, prairie turnips were more than food. They were lessons in resilience. Now, close your eyes and imagine digging one yourself. The soil is warm under the sun, the vine delicate in your hand. You press your digging stick into the earth, feel it give, pry up the root. It slides free, pale and firm. You peel its skin with your thumb, bite into it fresh. The taste is crisp, earthy, faintly sweet, a reminder that the land always hides gifts for those who know where to search. Later, you slice it thin, lay it on a rack, watch it turn translucent under the sun. Days pass and it hardens into something that could outlast you, a slice of time preserved. Why did prairie turnips never expire? Because water was driven out by sun and wind, leaving no space for bacteria. Because storage was clever, sealing away moisture. Because roots that began as fleeting summer food were transformed by tradition into eternal nourishment. They endured not by accident, but by design. Design written in soil, sharpened in tools, hardened in sun. And perhaps that's the most humbling truth of all. Sweetness like maple sugar was luxury. Protein like jerky was strength. But prairie turnips? They were persistence, the quiet kind of survival, plain and unassuming, yet essential. They proved that survival isn't always about brilliance or extravagance. Sometimes it's about digging deep, about finding hidden sustenance in overlooked places, about honouring the humble as much as the grand. The prairie turnips still crunch in your memory, translucent shards turned soft again in stew. But your gaze drifts now to the edge of a lake where reeds sway gently in shallow water. Here lies another treasure, one that ripples with wind, bends with waves, and yet endures just as stubbornly as any dried root or hardened sugar brick. This is wild rice, not true rice at all, but a grass seed, delicate in appearance yet mighty in survival. For the peoples of the Great Lakes and northern rivers, wild rice was more than food. It was identity, tradition, ceremony, and sustenance that outlasted storms, hunger, even time itself. Imagine late summer, the air cooler, dragonflies skimming the surface of still lakes. Families launch canoes, slender and quiet, into beds of wild rice that stretch like floating meadows across the water. 2 people work each canoe. One stands with a long pole, pushing slowly through the shallow bed, steering with care. The other sits, holding 2 smooth sticks, each about 3 feet long. As the canoe glides, the seated worker bends rice stalks gently over the side, tapping them with the sticks. Seeds rain down into the boat, pattering like soft rain on wood. Some fall back into the water, reseeding for next year. Others scatter across the canoe floor, piling steadily. Tap, bend, release. Stroke after stroke, hour after hour. It is rhythm, music, meditation. The sound of harvesting wild rice is unforgettable. The hiss of reeds brushing the canoe, the patter of seeds raining down, the creak of wood against water. Children ride along sometimes, scooping stray seeds, laughing at fish leaping among the stalks. The lake is alive, generous, offering food not with claws or teeth, but with patience and rhythm. Back on shore, the work continues. The rice, still moist, must be dried quickly. Spread across mats, it lies under the sun, turned again and again until its husks crackle. Fires may be lit, low and smoky, to hasten the process. Once dried, parching begins, rice roasted over heat, stirred constantly in kettles or pits. The parching not only drives out lingering moisture but also loosens the hulls, deepening flavour, locking in preservation. The air fills with a nutty, earthy scent, smoke curling upward, families working side by side. Then comes hulling. Traditionally, pits lined with hide were dug, filled with rice. People stepped into them, moccasins clean, and gently trod upon the grains, cracking hulls without crushing kernels. The sound was like faint drumming, soft and steady. Afterward, the rice was winnowed. Poured into birch bark trays, it was tossed into the wind, hulls blowing away, kernels falling back, over and over, until only the dark, glossy seeds remained. Each step was ritual, perfected over generations, a balance of labour and care. The result? Rice that could last not just seasons, but years. Properly dried, parched, and stored in bark containers or clay jars, it resisted spoilage brilliantly. Its low moisture content, combined with roasting, made bacteria helpless. Stored in cool, dry places, wild rice remained edible long after the hands that harvested it had grown old. Archaeologists have uncovered centuries-old caches still intact, their kernels dry, hard, ready to cook again. Imagine cooking rice gathered by ancestors long before your birth. That's the kind of durability wild rice offered. Now picture winter. Snow drapes the forests, lakes frozen silent. Inside a lodge, someone pulls out a bark container of rice. The kernels clatter like pebbles, dark and glossy. Poured into a pot of boiling water, they swell, split open, curl. The aroma rises, nutty and rich. Meat may be added, or dried berries, or nothing at all. Even plain wild rice carries flavour deep and satisfying, chewy yet tender. A spoonful fills you quickly, sustains you for hours. This isn't empty starch. Wild rice is rich in protein, more than almost any other grain. It offers iron, fibre, minerals. Each bite is power, carved from the lake itself. Humour lingered here too. Children teased that harvesting wild rice meant paddling through lake salads, or that the rice jumped willingly into the canoe when treated kindly. Elders joked about stomping pits being the rice dance, laughing as younger people tried to master the careful rhythm without crushing kernels. Someone always dropped a winnowing tray in a gust of wind, watching helplessly as precious rice scattered across the ground, only to be teased mercilessly. Even the most sacred food made space for laughter, because joy preserved spirits as much as food preserved bodies. But wild rice wasn't only nutrition, it was sacred. For the Anishinaabe, prophecies had guided them westward to the place where food grows on water. Wild rice wasn't just sustenance, it was destiny. Harvesting it was ceremony, preparation infused with gratitude, songs sung, offerings made. To eat wild rice was to connect with ancestors, to honour migration stories, to affirm identity. Each kernel carried more than calories, it carried culture, memory, promise. The trade value was immense. Wild rice became currency across the region, carried in bundles to distant camps, exchanged for hides, tools, or dried fish. Travellers packed it. Explorers relied on it. It was light enough to carry, dense enough to sustain, durable enough to outlast journeys. A canoe loaded with wild rice was wealth in motion. Paddles cutting through water, food piled high, promises stacked against hunger. Now close your eyes and taste it. A bowl of freshly cooked wild rice sits before you, steam curling upward. You lift a spoon, the kernels glistening, their chewy texture satisfying, their nutty flavour filling your mouth. It tastes earthy, ancient, grounding. Each bite feels like more than food. It feels like continuity, like history, like the voice of the lake whispering that survival is not only possible but beautiful. Modern comparisons seem almost silly. Our rice comes polished, packaged, expiration date stamped bold. It lasts months at best, growing stale, losing nutrients. Wild rice, properly treated, can sit for decades, waiting patiently. While we worry over pantry moths and mould, wild rice remains defiant, glossy and intact, mocking our fragile systems. So why did wild rice never expire? Because it was harvested with care, dried with patience, parched with skill, and stored with reverence. Because nature built it hardy and people perfected its preparation. Because communities respected it, never rushing, never careless. Food endures when treated with wisdom, and wild rice was wisdom you could eat. And now, as this long journey through food and survival comes to its close, let the cadence slow. Imagine the canoe gliding through reeds, seeds raining softly. Imagine smoke rising from parching fires, the steady tread of moccasins in hulling pits, the laughter of families winnowing in the breeze. Imagine a bowl of wild rice steaming before you in winter, warmth filling your belly, strength filling your bones. Let the fire in your mind burn lower, the tipi grow quieter, the snow hush the world outside. You have wandered through pemmican and corn, beans and jerky, nuts and seeds, berries and sugar, roots and grains. Each food a story, each story a survival, each survival a reminder that foresight and patience defeat hunger. Together they form not just meals, but a library of wisdom, a banquet of resilience. Breathe slower now, your shoulders softening, your jaw unclenching. Picture the jars sealed, the baskets stacked, the pits hidden, all safe, all waiting, all eternal. You're surrounded by abundance, surrounded by foresight, surrounded by whispers of ancestors saying, "We thought ahead, we endured, so will you." And as your eyes close, let the rhythm of harvest guide you into sleep, the tap of sticks against rice stalks, the patter of seeds into canoes, the hiss of steam rising from pots. Let it lull you, steady you, soften you. Because survival is not frantic, not panicked. It is slow, patient, careful. It is corn-hardened, berries dried, sugar crystallized, rice parched. It is food that never expired, because wisdom never expired. Rest now, held by that wisdom. Taste the sweetness of maple, the tartness of berries, the chew of rice. Feel the weight of pemmican, the crunch of nuts, the oil of sunflower seeds. Every flavor lingers in your mind, wrapping you in warmth. You are fed, you are safe, you are timeless. And sleep, like food, will carry you through the night,